The North, a world forged by cold winds and hard men. Its people carved their names into history with axes and oaths, sailing far from the fjords of home in search of plunder, trade, and glory. For generations, their longships had raided the coasts of Europe, yet the horizons of unknown lands and undiscovered western frontiers perpetually called their names. And one day, someone answered the call. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. If history is your thing, or you simply enjoy learning new topics, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to continue creating captivating, impactful historical content. In this video, we will discuss the Viking voyage to North America and the true European discovery of the New World. The Viking Age erupted into history with the sudden and brutal raid on the isolated British monastery of Lindisfarne in 793. This attack, whether spurred by hunger, ambition, or sheer opportunism, signaled the arrival of seafaring warriors from Scandinavia onto the world stage. Throughout the late 8th and much of the 9th century, Norse, Danish, and Swedish raiders struck fear into coastal communities across Europe. They targeted not just the exposed coasts of Britain, but also the riverways of the Franks and Slavic territories, sailing deep inland to loot monasteries and trade centers alike. But by the middle of the 9th century, these raids began to evolve. No longer content with hit-and-run attacks, Viking ambitions shifted more toward permanent footholds. Across the North Atlantic, Viking presence expanded to Orkney, the Faroe Islands, and into parts of Britain itself. Their struggle with the Anglo-Saxons eventually gave rise to the Danelaw, a region of eastern and northern England under Danish rule. These far-flung settlements became springboards for even more daring explorations. Pushing past the familiar coastlines, Norse traders began stumbling onto new lands. While Irish monks may have been the first to set foot, and some archaeological findings even hint at earlier Scandinavian visits, it was Norsemen like Nadoth and Garthar Svarvarsson who are credited with discovering Iceland, although both seem to have arrived by accident. True colonization of the island began when Ingolfur Arnarsson established the first permanent settlement of Reykjavik around 874, kicking off a new chapter in Viking expansion. By 930, Iceland had a thriving Norse population and had even established the Althing, the oldest surviving parliamentary institution in the world. By the 10th century, Iceland was no longer a remote outpost. It was a thriving Norse society, home to up to an estimated 25,000 settlers. It offered alternatives for those seeking new land, free governance, or just a fresh start. Among those who found themselves forced to seek that new start was Thorvald Asvaldsson, exiled from Norway around 960 for some killings, as the sagas vaguely put it. With no future in his homeland, he set sail west with his family, including his son Erik Thorvaldsson. Erik, born around 970, seemed to inherit more than his father's wandering spirit. He also inherited his temper. A feud with a neighbor in Iceland escalated into murder, forcing him to flee to a new settlement. There, another deadly dispute led to the deaths of 2 more men. This time the Thorsnesthing, the local assembly, had seen enough. Erik and his allies were outlawed for 3 years, effectively cast out of society. But Erik was no ordinary exile. Rather than return to Norway in shame, he did what Vikings did best. He looked west. During his 3-year exile, Erik sailed into uncharted waters and discovered a massive icy landmass, one that had likely been spotted by earlier explorers, such as Gunnbjorn Olfsson, but was never thoroughly explored. For 3 years, Erik the Red, as he became known, navigated the coasts of the new land. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland, not just as a free man, but as a recruiter. He called the island Greenland as a marketing ploy. As the sagas tell it, he believed that a pleasant name would lure settlers more effectively than tales of ice and desolation. His plan seemed to work. In 985, Erik led a fleet of ships back to Greenland, with dozens of families willing to gamble on a new life in uncertain lands. He established a settlement at Brattahlid on the island's southern coast, planting the Norse flag even deeper into the western frontier. Erik's son, Leif Erikson, yeah, they weren't very subtle about their naming system, was born in Iceland, but came of age in the harsh frontier of Greenland, far from the Norwegian homeland of his ancestors. Yet, as he reached adulthood, the pull of that homeland remained. Around the turn of the first millennium, Leif set sail eastward, eventually reaching the court of King Olaf Tryggvason in Norway. By then, the Viking world had begun to change. The old pagan gods were losing their grip, replaced by the rising tide of Christianity. King Olaf was a zealous convert and wasted no time bringing others into the fold, including Leif. The young explorer was baptized and, in return for the king's favor, was tasked with a new mission: return to Greenland and convert its settlers. What happened on the return journey is contested, but regardless of the narrative, it would earn Leif his place in history. According to the saga of Erik the Red, Leif's ship was blown off course in the treacherous North Atlantic. When land appeared on the horizon, it was not the coast he recognized. Leif and his crew went ashore and found a place unlike Greenland: grapes, self-grown wheat, and trees suitable for building, a rare and precious resource for the Greenlanders. They gathered what they could, making their way back home, reporting this strange and fertile land to the people. The saga of the Greenlanders tells a different tale, crediting a merchant sailor named Bjarni Heljalfsson with the first sighting of this land, some 15 years earlier. Lost in a fog and storms while trying to find Greenland, Bjarni came across an unfamiliar coastline, choosing not to land. When he finally made it to Greenland, he told the tale of the western shore he had seen. Leif, hearing Bjarni's story, purchased his ship and set out with the purpose of finding the land that had evaded his predecessor. Around the year 1000, he made multiple landfalls. First, a barren, rocky coastline called Helgeland, or Stoneland, possibly Baffin Island, then a wooded region called Markland, or Forestland, possibly Labrador, and finally a more temperate shore. There his crew wintered, establishing Leifsbúðir, meaning Leif's booth, and explored the surroundings. Among the riches of this new land were wild grapes, which might have been gooseberries or another fermentable fruit that reminded them of wine. Leif named this region Vinland, the land of wine. After the winter passed, he returned to Greenland with a ship full of timber and stories. Though Leif himself would never return to Vinland, he had broken the ice, and others from Greenland and Iceland, like his brother Thorvald, who would be killed by the natives, would. His voyage marked the first known European presence in the Americas, centuries before Columbus was born. For what was arguably one of the most remarkable exploratory feats of the Viking Age, or even human history, the Norse discovery of North America was surprisingly undersold. Outside of Greenland and Iceland, there is little indication that Leif Erikson's voyage, and even the brief Norse presence in Vinland, left much of a mark on the broader Scandinavian world. This muted reception may have stemmed from several trends. Norwegian society, under King Olaf Tryggvason, was undergoing a major transition. Christianization was displacing the Old Norse traditions, and the court's focus was turning inward toward alignment with continental Europe. The Viking discovery of new lands, from the Faroes to Iceland to Greenland, had also become somewhat routine in the Norse mindset. Another land may not have seemed as extraordinary to them as it does to us today. It's also entirely possible that they didn't realize the full scope of what they had found. With no understanding that this was a separate continent, they may have assumed Vinland was simply the next up in a chain of western islands, more distant, perhaps more fertile, but not fundamentally different. While the presence of native people might have sparked curiosity, or even wonder, the geographic implications might have gone unrecognized, limiting both the sense of urgency and the historical weight attached to the discovery at the time. Yet, for the Norse communities living on the fringes, in Greenland and to a lesser extent Iceland, fertile land to the west offered more than just prestige. Greenland in particular was isolated and resource poor. Vinland, with its forests, grapes, and game, presented a compelling opportunity. Expeditions were launched in the years following Leif's voyage, and, for a time, Norse settlers like Thorfinn Karlsefni, who brought a sizable group intending to stay, attempted to make a foothold in this new world, but these settlements were short-lived. The reasons behind the failure to establish a permanent Norse presence in North America are still debated and likely complex. The journey itself was arduous, stretching supply lines thin from Greenland, a colony that was itself modest in population and resources. Without a stable infrastructure or strong political support from the Norse homelands, now focused on religion and European affairs, each trip westward became less practical. Encounters with the indigenous people, whom the Norse called skrælings, were not always peaceful and may have further discouraged long-term occupation. While the sagas describe both trade and conflict, the overall tone suggests tension and vulnerability. Therefore, these Vinland voyages appear to have been seen, ultimately, by most as experimental ventures, rather than the foundation of a new frontier. What appeared to Norse eyes as a new land was, in truth, already inhabited by complex indigenous societies that had developed in isolation from Afro-Eurasia for millennia. For the peoples already living across these vast continents, the arrival of the Norse was not a discovery, but an encounter, brief though it was, with a world they had never known. Some traditions even suggest that Saint Brennan the Navigator, an Irish monk, may have reached the Americas several centuries earlier, though the evidence for Viking landings is far more convincing and widely accepted by scholars. In the centuries that followed, the Norse journeys to these quote-unquote new lands were preserved not through documentation or colonies, but through story. The sagas, orally passed and eventually written in medieval Iceland, told of new lands to the west, rich in timber and grapes, of fierce encounters with native people, and of heroic figures like Leif Erikson and Thorfinn Karlsefni. Yet the sagas often blurred the line between history and mythology, combining real voyages with legend and literary flourish. For generations, the tales of Vinland were seen as just that. Tales. Romanticized, nationalistic, perhaps inspired by truth, but unverifiable all the same. The skepticism persisted until the mid-20th century, when archaeological discoveries dramatically altered the conversation. In the 1960s, Norwegian explorer Helge and his archaeologist wife Anne Stein Ingstad uncovered the remains of a Norse settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. The site, dated to around 1000 CE, matched many details of the sagas and provided the first concrete evidence that Vikings had indeed crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. Today, with clear Viking evidence, L'Anse aux Meadows stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Though these journeys didn't lead to enduring settlements or reshape global geopolitics, like later voyages of Columbus or Cortez, they remained deeply significant. They redefined the boundaries of the known world, expanded our understanding of early transoceanic travel, and left behind a story that continues to challenge and inspire. In many ways, the Vikings may have simply been ahead of their time. Had their voyages taken place a few centuries later, when European powers poured resources into maritime exploration, their discoveries might have been wildly different, and may have even altered the trajectory of global empire building. But in the 11th century, the world was not yet primed for such sweeping endeavors. While historians often name the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 as the official end of the Viking Age, the voyage to Vinland stands out as a more poetic finale. A final thrust into the unknown by a seafaring peoples who had spent centuries pushing the edges of the map. Vinland was not just another land. It was the last great horizon in a rapidly changing world. The sagas captured it as a moment of promise and peril, of ambition and uncertainty, and in hindsight, it may have well been the final chapter in the story of a people who once defined themselves by how far they could go. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.